the public domain won't have heard of these companies. He said, why don't you get in touch with them? And he gave me the top guy who we get in touch with. So I think I sent him a copy of The Deep. I don't know if you guys are familiar with The Deep, which I released in 1994. And as these things usually go, I talked to the guy at DeWolf, and he said, yeah, it's really nice, but we don't really have any work for you at this point in time. So I'm like, oh yeah, okay, just the usual thanks, but no thanks. And then suddenly, out of the blue, 6 months after that, he phoned me and said, actually, we've got a project which we think you would be good for. And I went, okay. So I wrote these tracks and they liked them, and then they asked me to do some more, and then they asked me to do some more, and it just escalated over the years. And I've done, as you said, about 20 or so of these albums. And it's a very good source of income because I get royalties. It's in the UK, you've got the Performing Rights Society, the PRS. You'll have your equivalents in the States and in South America as well. And every 3 months, 4 times a year, any of these pieces of music that's been used, wherever it is in the world, I'll get a certain amount of money for those, even on things I've already done 5, 10, even 20 years ago. So even if I don't get out of bed, I'll still get this income. So it still comes. So I can get that as a source of income coming in whilst I'm doing all this and doing din.
Now, you're a very prolific musician, and besides electronic music, is any particular type of music that you listen to now that you cannot play gigs, so you need to be at home with your wife, and you like pop music or
I like music that I think is good. Classical has always been a big love of mine. So where do we even start in the whole genre? Bach, J.S. Bach is always fantastic. The impressionistic composers, Debussy, Ravel, Satie, Vaughan Williams, the English composer. But then I like some of the really strange modern classical music. I like a lot of rock from when I was young. Before I got into the electronic music, I used to like bands like Focus and Genesis and Camel and Hawkwind and Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. So I've got a huge range of taste. Pop music, I like this. If it's a well constructed pop piece of music, let's look at ABBA. I'm not really that keen on ABBA, but I can recognize when something is composed well,
sure.
as opposed to just something which is just a silly tune, which is not really going to appeal to people, but maybe has a novelty factor. I don't mind listening to almost anything if I think it's, in my opinion, it's well composed and well put together. It could be as melodic as you want or as strange as you want, as long as it's kind of saying something.
Well, Ian, you're very not just prolific, but very well-known musician. Not just in Europe, but if you have the opportunity to do like a duo or play with another musician in particular, it's important to you play with somebody else. Let's say if you have the opportunity
I've done lots of collaborations over the year, and that was one of the reasons I started Din as well. There was several reasons, but I wanted to work with other musicians. Marcus Reuter I've worked with, the German touch guitarist, obviously Mark Shreve is Arc, Eric Volov I've worked with, Robert Rich. These are musicians that are as well known as I am, if not more well known than I. And all the collaborations I've worked with these and other musicians always bring something new. So when I work with Eric, I think we come up with an album that we wouldn't have done on our own. With Robert Rich, the same. Marcus Reuter, particularly, he's a completely different musical world in some ways that I inhabit. But when we work together, the two of us somehow come up with something completely new. And I've done music now for a long time. The first release was 1980, so exactly 40 years. And I cannot do the same thing over and over again. I'm not one of those musicians who try to sound like Tangerine Dream, or I mean, there's some elements of what I do obviously has connections, but I always try to forge ahead and do new things. I can't just do the same thing over and over again. So working with collaborations is a way of keeping things fresh.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Very good answer. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, Ian, is there any chance that we can expect some like live DVD or Blu-ray? You know, I don't know if I myself like to have physical format again in video. I like Blu-ray and DVD. The quality is amazing. Are you planning? Do you think that there could be some editions in the future of live shows or something?
Probably not. The problem with producing a Blu-ray or a DVD, a video, is it's very, very expensive. Because to do it well, you have to really go for it. You have to really have high quality cameras and cameras. You can't just use one. You have to have multiple cameras, people to operate the cameras, people to edit. It's a really expensive thing to do. I know that the guys from Node recently have done a really good DVD, Node Live DVD, but I know that it's cost a lot of money to do that. It's not something that I feel that I would ever get a return on. I have to use avenues like YouTube. I put clips of concerts there. It's just too expensive for the amount of sales that I think I would generate. I would be heavily out of pocket, I'm afraid. So I would never say never, but probably not.
Okay. Now, I would like to mention two people that I think possibly were possibly very relevant, not only in your career, but also other people I remember in those days, like Ron Berry, the Osiris album that I think is fantastic. Do you remember Dennis and Janet Ensley?
Oh, of course. They obviously they started off the whole UK electronica thing. And the first one was in 1983. And until that time, I'd only performed concerts really close to home, within 20 or 30 miles of where I lived. I'd only done concerts in the northeast of England. And suddenly this UK electronica thing was being started up. I was already friends with Mark Shreve, and I remember going with Mark Shreve and Dennis and Jeanette Elmsley in the car to have a look at the first venue in Milton Keynes in 1982. So it was a big deal for me. It was a big deal for me to actually play at all the UK electronicas, but obviously most specifically the first one. I didn't even have a car. I had to get all my gear. Somebody else gave us a lift down with the gear. I got the train down and hoped the gear would be there when I got there. So yes, that was a long time ago. Same year as the climb.
Yeah. Now, something else. You mentioned some of your favorite bands and albums. You mentioned Tangerine Dream, Vangelis, and Ashra. Would you point some of those of their albums, like one that you wouldn't be able to live without? You know, everybody has, like, for me, Rubicon by Tangerine Dream.
You've just answered my question. You just answered my question.
Yeah. Which are your favorite ones?
Rubicon and Phaedra, probably for Tangerine Dream. It's an interesting thing with Tangerine Dream because obviously they've been going for a long time, and their music has changed and evolved over such a long period of time. And what they do now is almost unrecognizable compared with when they first started out. And there's many reasons for that. And somebody made the point that in some ways a band that's been going so long, your favorite albums you have of them are the albums you first get into. So for me, I was a teenager in the 70s, so of course those early and mid 70s albums are the first albums of theirs that I got into. So that's the time period where I like them the most. Maybe that's the same for yourself as well. Plus, I guess at that time on those albums, they really almost didn't know. There wasn't any rules. Nobody knew how to produce an electronic music album in the style that we all love. They were the first guys to do it. And of course, Klaus Schulze is a big influence as well. How do I even choose a favorite Klaus Schulze album? I'll choose one Mirage, because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of Klaus's albums. It's way too long. It's way too self-indulgent, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful, and it's not easy to do, to get that sound. Vangelis, that's a tricky one of Vangelis because he does so much stuff. And I'm going to choose Heaven and Hell because it's crazy. No one's ever done an album like that. It's such a unique album. I don't like all of Heaven and Hell, but the good bits is fantastic, and it's such a unique album. I don't know of anyone who's done an album like Heaven and Hell. I don't know another musician who would even attempt to do an album like Heaven and Hell.
What do you think makes that album particularly good? I mean,
it's just crazy. It shouldn't exist. I mean, what is it? Is it prog? Is it electronic? You got John Anderson singing on the track. There's choirs. There's demonic voices. There's everything. It's just a unique. It's a unique reflection of his personality. Like all musicians, all good musicians, he's a unique individual, and no one could have produced an album like Heaven and Hell. There's some of these other albums are probably better, but I'm just pulling this off the top of my head.
Now we haven't spoken about the French scene that I'm not only referring to Jean-Michel Jarre, whose dad I could luckily meet and interview once he came back here in Chile for a song festival, famous song festival back in '89, I guess. He told me, I'm going to give you his phone number so that they can interview him, and he never did. I mean, I could never reach him back. Do you know Richard Beeman, for example? Heldon, of course.
Yes.
Zanop, do you know Zanop, who's a more recent character? Zanop with Z?
No, I don't think so.
No? What's your impression of this French scene? We know less about it than others. Heldon, for example, is totally dark and heavy, but you like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin.
I do. I mean, Led Zeppelin, of course, cover a huge range. Black Sabbath is something I grew up with when I was young, and a lot of people talk about heavy metal, and I don't think any bands quite sound as heavy as Black Sabbath does. There's something about Tony's double-track guitars in those early albums. It just has a sound, a portentous, over-the-top, tongue-in-cheek, wonderful sound. I mean, Jean-Michel Jarre, his album, when was Oxygen? Was that 1978?
76.
76, gosh.
Yeah.
I think I got that when I was 18. And I wasn't so keen on it when I very first heard it. But looking back, and especially Equinox, you talk about the analog sound. To me, Equinox is the most lushly, warm, tape echoey kind of analog synth album I've ever heard. That's actually my favorite, especially the first 2 or 3 tracks. It's just got this. It doesn't so much come out the speakers. It just kind of oozes out the speakers, and it's just got this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sound. But it's the early. I'm not so keen on some of his later things, Jean-Michel Jarre. But he's always been what Jean-Michel Jarre has that the German guys didn't have. He was able to write a good tune. Tangerine Dream, for all their wonderful strengths, could never write a tune as good as Jean-Michel Jarre, which is probably why Jean-Michel Jarre commercially has been more successful, because the vast majority of people like a good tune.
And what about this lady now who's turned 80-something these days? Wendy Carlos, that I really, I'm sure that you do like Switch It on Bach.
I've got an original copy of Switched on Bach. It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite of hers. It's quite twee in a way, and Sonic Seasonings is the one for me. Sonic Seasonings is not typical of her output, but it was basically an ambient. It was an ambient album before anybody else, even before Eno coined the phrase ambient. That, especially the autumn track, is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I think I've ever heard. The way she combines the very restrained and the analog synth she's playing, which with a slightly classical feel, with all these really atmospheric sounds of the sea and the birds and the heather burning, all those sounds. So Sonic Seasonings is actually my favorite album of hers.
Now, the last one from my side, Ian, if you had no chances, if somebody asked you to make pop songs like electropop, whatever they call it, would you be willing to do that, or would you not want to be involved in that scene?
It's not a case of not wanting to be involved in the scene. In a way, I mentioned this living in a ritual on spirits. That's probably the closest I've ever got to a pop song. I did actually do some pop stuff when I was young, when I was first doing my cassettes, and went down with a friend to the record companies, and we nearly got a record deal. Not quite, but nearly. But then I went down a different path, and I don't think I would do it now. I don't think I need to do it now. Maybe I might have done it. Your life, as you go through your life, it takes lots of different paths and forks. And looking back, I've had this unique route to where I am now. In another universe, through another path, I might have gone down the pop route. Because sometimes I have rhythms and elements of that in what I do. But it's not something I'm going to do now. I'm quite comfortable doing what I do.
Okay, well, I want to say thanks so much, Ian, for the time. Thank you, Claudio, for the invitation. It's like closing the circle after I don't know how many years I first played Ian Boddy in Chile. And so it's nice to have had the chance to talk to you directly, face to face, amazingly. So, yeah, we never thought that we could do this 20-something years after I first heard your music. So thank you for your time. Take good care and keep up the good work.
I will do.
Yeah. You remember? We'll ask a couple last final questions. Do you remember where the first 2 albums or 3 albums that you ever bought when you were younger?
Yeah, good question. I think Focus. Have you heard of the Dutch band Focus?
Of course, Christian.
Yeah. I think probably Focus 3 was one of the very first albums. I think that 1972 or 73. I may not have bought it when it first came out, but I think I was probably 14 or 15 when I bought that. And the lovely double sleeve and then Hamburger Concierto, and we read all the instruments. And of course, my school friends and I used to do something which I don't think many young folk do now. And when you tell them about this, they kind of look at you as though you're slightly mad. And that is, when a new album came out of a band which we all liked, obviously in school, different groups of people like different kinds of albums. I was at an all-boys school. And when the new Focus album came out, we would go around to our friend's house, whose elder brother had a really good hi-fi, and we would sit in the front room, and we would with 3 or 4 of us, we would put on this vinyl record, and we would sit and not say a word and listen to it. That's what we would do for 40 minutes or 45 minutes. We would just listen to it. Then we would stop, get a cup of tea or whatever, and we would chat about it and look at the sleeve and put it on again. And while we talked about it, for the whole, I'm sure maybe you guys did this kind of thing. It was great. Me and my friends would sit around, and that's all we would do. We had no mobile phones, no computers, no games. Yeah. The actual process of sitting and listening to an album of music, especially with friends who like the same kind of music, was absolutely enough to have a great time.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Christian. I think.
Yeah, no, I asked Claudio to mention the following, Ian. Focus have been here like 4 times in Chile. Luckily, I really love them because exceptionally, their albums, The Live at the Rainbow, was published in Chile. We have very, very few progressive albums published in Chile, if at all. So once I had a short conversation with Thijs Valier, and he said to me, the best thing that I've done is this. And I asked him to sign my copy of Pedal Point, Donna Novis Pacem. I'm sure you're familiar with that. With the Chilean musicians, Mario Argandoña and Tato Gomez, and Thijs Valier and Jan Ackerman, the Latin Mass.
I don't think I am. Actually, no, I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, please go to YouTube and take listen to it. It's a fantastic, wonderful composition. It's a double album with some nice dubs on the cover. So that's what he said. This is the best I've done in my whole career. So,
or maybe send me the link. If you send me the link later on, be cool.
Sure. Well, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. You mentioned before, that obviously with the coronavirus and most of the gigs they have been canceled. But assuming that the virus will go away with a vaccine or what have you, do you plan to do any gigs in the States or in Latin America if possible?
Well, Latin America, I've never played before. It depends whether somebody invites you, and also obviously when you go that far, there's a certain degree of expenses which need to be covered. Philadelphia in the States, I've played at a few times because Chuck Van Zyl, who does the Stars End radio show, he organises the Gatherings series of concerts. So there's a good chance that I'll go there again. We'll just have to see when. And I've got some more concerts. I mean, some of the concerts that have been cancelled this year, there's a tentative alternative dates for 2021. But at the moment, it's too early to pin down exact dates. But I'm sure, I mean, the viruses, I mean, of course, having done biochemistry, I kind of understand quite a lot of how these things work. The virus will never go away completely. It'll become like flu. And each year you get a vaccination because it always mutates. Viruses always mutate. And you'll get a vaccination. In the UK, certainly you get each autumn, people who are susceptible to, especially older people, they get a vaccination for flu. You'll get a vaccination the same each year. But it exists now, so it will never disappear completely. But we'll obviously get it under a degree of control where we can obviously live more normal lifestyles than we are at this point in time.
Gotcha, great. Thank you very much. And if you're comfortable, then again, I will rephrase that. If you're comfortable, you want to play a couple of tunes?
Well, I've got this. We mentioned Omicron before, which is the Omicron on Axiom. It was used on portals. Obviously, I use a computer to record these things, and I use Ableton Live, and I had all the different parts either recorded as pieces of audio, because a lot of the analog gear you have to record them as a piece of audio because they're never the same twice. They all kind of change and drift. But I wanted to get the MIDI information and the information out of the computer and use the modular instruments just to play it all back. So I was just kind of working on something. So if I turn the screen a little bit, I mean, I might get in the way.
Beautiful.
I've got a more modern rack down the bottom here, and this has actually got the sequence information that's going to play two sounds from the Roland System 100M. You can probably see there's a rack right at the top there, and that's going to play the high sequence line, which is like arpeggios, and the bass line, and then some of the drum loops from the original track. There's a sampler module here where I put the drum loops in, and the sequences also triggers those. This means I can now have a version where I can play it live. I'll play some chords as well, although I haven't got that set up today. I was just working on this part. But it means if I do play live, I can interact with it more. It's not just the same as playing to a backing track. So if I press play, I may have to turn the volume up to a point where you guys can tell me that it's loud enough.
Yeah.
Yes, it's good.
Okay.
Is that loud enough?
Yeah. So.
Turn it down so that you could just say I could interact with it more. I was just changing some of the sounds.
Yeah.
I don't know how clear. It's hard to actually play that, and it's only come through one speaker. The speaker's behind the computer because I've got this turned at an angle. But that's just using this kind of gear live. I don't use the 100M live that often because it weighs quite a lot to cart that around. But the modular gear, I'm just kind of working on ideas of how I can recreate this track live. So I don't know whether that came through.
Great. Well, Ian, thank you again very much for your time. And I believe that Christian shared the link with you.
Okay.
The ones he mentioned that is in YouTube, or I can send you that. Well, hopefully I would like to meet you one day, and hopefully I live like 2 hours from Philadelphia. So if you ever do some gigs here in the East Coast or in Washington DC, I would love to meet you and go for a drink or coffee, whatever, and then
that'd be nice.
Thank you very much for your time, and keep up the good work, man. You're doing very good work, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay, cheers.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.